Good morning once again, everyone. I'm Joe Uhas, and I'm joining with my friend Stephanie Nelson as a founding partner in the creation of Capital Pipeline. We're delighted to bring to you this morning the first of what will become the annual State of Capital. There'll be an opportunity for this to be an interactive conversation. We'll have an opportunity to answer questions. And we've put together a program I think that you're going to find both interesting and informative, but also really exciting, because you're going to see for the first time an interesting collection, a unique collection of data that I think all of us are going to be intrigued to see. This morning, you'll learn a little bit more about the significance of Arizona's dynamic capital improvement environment, its importance to local community growth and stability, and in achieving its economic development goals. And you're also going to hear a bit about what's happening on the federal level as local leaders and all of you that are in the AEC sector anxiously await the outcome of deliberations on the federal stimulus programs. Most importantly, you're going to hear from Capital Pipeline CEO Stephanie Nelson, who's going to expose you to data, lots and lots of data contained in the first of its kind research product, a complete statewide inventory of capital improvement landscape, the planned projects for 91 cities and 15 counties, state agencies, all totaling approximately $40 billion to make all of that happen. Not only a first of its kind in Arizona, but frankly, the first of its kind of any state in the nation. This morning's presentation is made possible by the support of our co-sponsors, Local First Arizona, BUILD, the organization meeting the marketing needs of Southern Arizona and its architects and engineers, the Arizona Association of Economic Development, and Goodwin Schwartz Public Affairs. Our sponsor today, and an organization in which Capital Pipeline is pleased to be its data partner, is the League of Arizona Cities and Towns. I'd like to welcome its Executive Director, Tom Belshey, for some opening comments. Tom?
Thank you, Joe. We really appreciate everyone being a part of this morning. This is one of the most exciting partnerships that I've been involved in my 30 years working with cities and towns in Arizona. We think that every one of our 91 cities plus our other county and university participants will find themselves somewhere in this product, and look forward to talking about that today and letting each of our participants know exactly how they can take advantage of this wonderful product.
Thanks, Tom, and we're excited about that partnership as well. I think a lot of good things are going to come out of it, especially for communities communities that you and the League work so hard to represent, are going to see a more robust bidding process as a result. By putting this data out there early, long before the RFPs are even available. Now, before we get to the data that Stephanie's going to share, we've assembled a panel today of distinguished individuals who are going to each offer a different perspective of the capital improvement landscape on the federal, state, and local level. Carrie Kelly is the Executive Director of the Arizona Association for Economic Development, the leading statewide association that's responsible for advocating for responsible economic development. Luis Heredia is the State Director of the Office of United States Senator Mark Kelly. And we also have with us Jim Rounds, who is known to many of you on this call, statewide, one of Arizona's best statewide economic economists, who in fact collaborates with many of the organizations that are part of today's presentation. Now, to guide this panel discussion, I'm going to turn it over to Deirdre Gilmore, again, is no stranger to many of you on the call. Deirdre's firm, Tank Girl Marketing, you can see it right there behind her, obviously. I can't read it quite as well as probably all of you can see it. But Deirdre, again, is no stranger to just about everybody on this call. If you've been successful in the industry as an architect, engineer, consultant, contractor, Deirdre might have been working for you. And if she hasn't been working for you, it's probably because one of her opponents, one of her clients beat you out in competing for one of those projects. So Deirdre, we're delighted to have you moderate this conversation. Again, this is going to be very interactive. We're going to have a chance to answer questions. So I'll turn it over to you, Deirdre. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joe, for the great introduction. I'm blushing a little bit, frankly. This is such an exciting conversation today. I know many of you on the call, like me, do a lot of strategic planning and are always trying to forecast what's happening next. And so we're just so lucky to have this panel here today to talk about this infrastructure bill, how it's going to affect us on a federal, state, local level, and then go into a deeper dive on actually the data and what's out there today. So thank you for joining us, and I'm super excited to get started. So what we're going to do is our panel's each going to give about a 7-minute overview on their perspective of this spending, and then we're going to get into Q&A, and we really want to hear from you. So if you look down to the bottom right of your Zoom, hopefully y'all are familiar with this format at this point, there's a Q&A section. So please, please, please type your questions in there. We're going to get to them as efficiently as possible. I've got some few pre-programmed ones, but I'd really love to understand, what you guys want to know, and let this panel share all of their knowledge with you. So that being said, let's go ahead and get started with Luis here. He's right in the middle of my screen. So let's go and hear your 7-minute overview.
Thank you, Deidre. My name is Luis Heredia. I'm the executive director for the state director for Senator Mark Kelly, and very happy to be part of this conversation. It is certainly a very necessary gathering to really discuss the importance of just major infrastructure that really makes Arizona much more competitive, but also planning for the future, in which we just need a much more cohesive and robust and comprehensive package as we look at projects that are funded by the federal government, or oftentimes a mixture of federal, state, and local funds that really make Arizona competitive. So in my role as working for the senator, especially at this time, and I'm going to kind of dig in and start off with the timing of the bill. We know that the Senate took action in August. We are now awaiting a very complicated, but also I am optimistic about the timing of a federal infrastructure bill that will likely move out of the House. The question is if it will have differences, and will the need for conferencing. We all know that there was a deadline set in September, that deadline did not was not achieved, and there is now another deadline for next week. Ongoing conversations, but I do have optimism in a resolution, especially on the infrastructure bill, because of many of the provisions that have broad bipartisan support, but also our country just needs this planning document for us to really compete not only in our regions, but also globally. I want to just point out a couple things. The senator is focused on making sure that we maximize federal investments in our state. We've been working with the Council of Governments, the regional planning organizations, with cities and towns and mayors. We've been actively a part of many grant applications, of which you have asked for the Senate office to participate in letters of support. And so from our view, we have a really great opportunity to just look at the diversity and the need that is out there. And our commitment from the senator is that we will continue to advocate for rural Arizona, metropolitan areas, but also in the ability to, like I mentioned, drawing down the maximized federal investments possible. I want to highlight that Senator Kelly is the first senator to serve in the Senate Committee on Environment and Public Works since 1969. This committee has jurisdiction over highways, the Army Corps of Engineers, and water resources. And it's extremely important that we continue to leverage our role in that committee to connect a lot of the priorities that Arizona needs, and also is desperately on the waiting list for federal funding. I want to mention some bits about the federal, the infrastructure bill that we are currently discussing. And some of the more specific issues to Arizona is the work that was done, especially on Western water infrastructure. For example, there is $3.2 billion for the Bureau of Reclamation to invest in the aging infrastructure account. This allows revolving loans to address some of the deferred maintenance on Bureau Reclamation projects. That includes facilities in Yuma or in Central Arizona. It also means that more resources to upgrade dams that were built in the 1930s and reservoirs and canals, and we really need to. There is a list, and that list needs to be funded. These have ripple effects on how it impacts our agriculture economy, how it impacts just the delivery of water and throughout our state. Let me also say that there is $250 million to fully fund the Lower Basin Drought Contingency Plan, which is extremely important, and it was negotiated and it continues to be a key center point for the senator. The senator led a drought hearing in the committee to try to address these particular issues, and especially as new information or more concerns are being brought up to light, the need to fund important projects to conserve, to create the storage of water, and also to mitigate some of the drought conditions that we're currently experiencing. I could go down the list, but there are a lot of nuggets in the infrastructure that are directly beneficial for Arizona. A number of them have to do also with prepare, but also mitigating wildfire prevention instead of just wildfire management. So there is, for example, $2.4 billion in the USDA Forest Service to really reduce these areas that could that are very, if not attended to with smart science-based approaches to wildfire management and prevention. We really are reacting to natural disasters that Arizona experienced in just this year in June of 2021. So there is $2.4 billion of additional funding in which we will see our ability to combat fires. Again, there are a number of different priorities in this particular bill. Let me just also say that there is funding for us to mitigate some of the mine cleanup, especially very important in the Navajo Nation, where there are 400 former uranium mines that need cleanup. And this particular bill invests about $3 billion for us to work on federal, state, tribal, and local mines that have been abandoned throughout the country. But this primarily is of a huge importance for the Navajo Nation and other areas in the state that are impacted with abandoned mines. The other issue is electrical grid resiliency, for example, a big topic for today, but also just the ability for the bill to advance the expansion of just energy management initiatives like the demand response programs or enhanced grid reliability, particularly in Arizona during the summer months. And so the bill outlines a number of provisions for this. And finally, I want to just go over a couple of the roads and bridges and surface transportation. The bill itself adds $2 billion of new discretionary funding for rural surface transportation grant programs, which this includes like $300 million for high-risk rural. Sorry. Sorry, I have a. I apologize. My phone was on with a different meeting prior to this. What I wanted to just mention is that the particular 300 million set aside for high risk rural roads. For example, we've heard a lot from Wickenburg and the communities up to Kingman, the safety of that corridor and the need for us to mitigate some of those issues is extremely important. So when this bill was crafted, these set-asides and the ability to move $300 million to target some road safety priorities is a strong priority for the senator. Again, there are a number of different items I want to highlight. For example, another example, there is $12.5 billion for national and local infrastructure projects that allow us to advance these national significant projects in a way that we could invest in the widening of I-10, look in moving Interstate 11, for example, and other federal resources that are needed, especially during the pre-construction and the planning and design concepts. And so this is a significant increase in this particular grant program, but very important for a growing state. I want to highlight the priority is the work that's already in progress for Interstate 11. The senator has met with Secretary Buttigieg, has continues to advocate in the Senate that between Phoenix and Las Vegas, it is the largest, the two largest metropolitan areas that are not connected by an interstate. And there are a number of members that have been educated on the need, and there's an important corridor and partnership with our fellow senators in the Nevada state and across the region that will promote that particular corridor. The big thing that I have to just mention is that this bill is moving in a way that has, unlike I would say other legislation, the work in infrastructure has been years in the making. There have been a lot of conversations on infrastructure in years past. There was a lot of work that was picked up that was debated, thought for, and really planned out on how to respond to major infrastructure needs in the country. So when this package was put together, the body of work was already in the process, and the ability that our senior senator and the group of 22 senators that worked in a bipartisan way was a roadmap that adds to the optimism that I mentioned earlier. There is a lot of bipartisan work that wasn't only crafted in the summer. It's been accumulation of years and years of infrastructure projects that have been delayed, deferred, or kicked down the can down the road in a way that we're not paying attention to the critical needs of our state. So I'm very glad to be a part of this conversation, and also as a resource for use our office as a resource to address major applications that you are looking for. We've written a number of letters of support. During the RAISE grant competitive cycle, we got to learn about the important projects that are being presented to the Department of Transportation. And we work with these local communities to try to access additional funding. And the ability for us to be involved early allows us to continue to advocate on behalf of the constituents of Arizona to draw down the maximized federal investment in our state because of our growth, because of the dynamic nature of our economy, and the need for us to finally pay attention to critical infrastructure projects, which is the topic of today. So thank you.
Thank you, Luis. That was really enlightening. Thank you so much. All right, up next, we have Carrie Kelly, who can address the economic development situation across statewide as the Executive Director of the Arizona Association for Economic Development. So good morning, Carrie.
Hello, thank you. It's a great morning. I see a lot of my friends as attendees and members of AAD, so I'm happy to have you here. We are a member organization that serves as the voice of responsible economic development in the state of Arizona. And I'll take a little step back here and sort of talk about economic development and how it relates to this topic. So often when the public thinks of economic development, growth really comes to mind. And we certainly have that in Arizona. But economic development really encompasses quality of life issues for communities. So businesses will not look to locate or expand here unless their children can have a good education, unless their families can have outdoor recreational opportunities, unless they can find a workforce that meets their needs. And they especially won't look at locating or expanding if the community doesn't have the infrastructure to meet their needs as a company. And this is really where capital improvement projects and economic development intersect. Economic development strategies really provide the roadmap for investment. And having a long-term economic development plan that matches the capital improvement plan is vital for communities. And that's really happened in Arizona. Over the past 2 years, we've seen a lot of growth, especially in the greater Phoenix area. But sometimes what's overlooked is the investment in our more rural communities as well. And that's leading to new industries and expansion of existing industries. I think we all know about the growth that's happened in Pinal County, and which really makes sense because it's in between Tucson and Greater Phoenix. And as both of those get larger, you sort of meet in the middle. But if you look at a county like Mojave County, there's been infrastructure and transportation improvements that have yielded new large businesses like Doc Foods to the area. So Arizona, from urban to rural, is really well positioned for continued growth because of planning and the vision of these communities. Because we're positioned for growth, we also have to be agile and ready to shift resources when necessary. When new industries like TSMC comes in, we've had to shift infrastructure needs in those cities to address the needs of the businesses that come in. Another issue that we're also facing in Arizona and nationwide is the increases in the commodity costs. Those kinds of things are going to affect growth and the number of businesses that we can attract. With the new bill especially, we're really looking at having funds finally for some of the things that we really needed to fund and what Louise talked about. We've got EV infrastructure, we've got airports, water infrastructure, power and grid, broadband. I lived in Mojave County and we have satellite cable and internet. So it's so vital that we get broadband to some of these areas. All things that directly play into the quality of life for Arizona communities. But despite our challenges that we see, we're still anticipating economic development and capital improvement markets to shine bright in Arizona. So I think, the future looks bright, and I'm excited to be here to have this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you so much. All right. Next up, we have Jim Rounds. I'm sure most people on this call are very familiar with Jim and his view on Arizona's economy. So Jim, love to hear your take on all of this.
Sure, and Luis and Carrie gave a great overview and took a number of my points. So let me shift it just a little bit and give slightly different context. We have a great opportunity now to make some significant investments, and it's not just building a road. It's not just adding some additional broadband with no economic benefit. It's really lifting the state. And so if you go back many years, we were growing before the Great Recession. We got hit really hard, then we changed. We diversified the economic base to the extent we could. We addressed tax policy. We created all new economic development programs, regulatory issues. And then we had the COVID recession, which allowed us to think about issues related to, can we work more remotely? Are there additional economic opportunities for rural Arizona? Because rural Arizona recovered much more slowly than the rest of the state after the Great Recession, and there's still some constraints. And so because infrastructure is such a foundational item, like Carrie said, it gives us a number of opportunities. And what we need to do is make sure we provide people like Senator Kelly and others and staff a good arsenal of information so that we can secure some of the federal monies. And I know that some colleagues don't like to take federal monies for projects, but those federal monies came out of my pocket, came out of everybody's pocket that's listening to this. Wouldn't it be great to get as much of those back as possible to be used on projects? But we can think outside the box also, and I'd love to chat with Senator Kelly about some of these issues, because you have the infrastructure that's the foundation, but you need that to create the other economic opportunities. And so one thing that we were looking at as an opportunity is getting more involved in environmental tech issues, trying to create a little bit of a momentum, a state strategy on that. Well, why is that important? Well, when you're dealing with environmental technology issues, you're dealing with things like the agriculture components that we were talking about. You're dealing with things like the economic issues up in Apache County related to the power plant closing, and how do you offset those economic problems? Well, you need to increase broadband access, but then you have to have a plan to utilize it so you grow the economy. So I know that that region is looking at some of those issues. when you get involved in this environmental tech, you have to look at the clean energy opportunities. Now, where we get into problems is when government tries to push something forward before it's quite ready. It's a heavier lift. It's easier when the private sector is already moving down that path a bit, and then the government can kind of nudge it a little bit. And, you know, kind of like teaching a kid how to ride a bike, you hold on and you help them until they can go by themselves. And so on the clean energy issues, I think we're going to be there, but we have to talk about whenever we're going to be applying for these things, it's very helpful to talk about return on investment. And this wasn't discussed at the state level for years. We started talking about it in terms of healthcare infrastructure, so a different kind of infrastructure. We started talking about it in terms of healthcare a while ago, and policymakers really understood it. And so when we try to secure these monies, when communities try to secure these monies, and when we've worked with some groups that are trying to help these different communities get some of these monies, the focus has always been on what's a return on investment, so that the people that are distributing the grants can understand, here's how that community is going to benefit, here's how it's going to take care of a poverty issue, and here's how it's going to blend with other stuff. So you have to remember that this can't be discussed as an item by itself. This is one piece of a much bigger picture issue. And so this ties in very well to just the key foundation items in economics, and what Carrie mentioned as you have other economic development tools. You have workforce training, sometimes you have incentives, but quite often a business just needs a quality road. They might need an extra cul-de-sac built that was going to be built 3 or 4 years down the road. So if you do it now, is it really an extra expenditure, or is it just a time value of money to maybe help a business advance? And so you can do these infrastructure projects at the small scale, at the city level, or at the larger scale, and really increase the economic opportunities for the state. So if we're going to take it to the next level, and we've done great in terms of growth, but we need to catch up in terms of the quality of growth. We're still lagging in terms of incomes, wages, gross state product by person, things like that. This opportunity that was given to us from the COVID recession to kind of reflect on ourselves and figure out what we want to do, like we did after the Great Recession, it's really fine-tuning things. And I feel like infrastructure is going to be part of that. And the more information that there is out there about infrastructure projects, having more bidders. Look what happens in housing. When you have a number of bidders, you end up getting a lot more. Well, you can reduce the costs if you have more competition. So I'm excited to see the second half of the discussion. But overall, I was a little bit all over the place with this discussion, but I think it was by necessity, because this isn't just one item. This is something that's a component of dozens of other things. And there's lots of ways to advance the economy. And I really hope we can do a good job, and we can work with the congressional delegation and try to figure out how we can maximize the revenues coming in, and then maximize the effectiveness of those projects by doing internal planning that's of high quality.
Great, thank you so much, Jim. I noticed a couple of questions are starting to pop up in here. Guys, don't be shy about putting your questions in. We have one more panelist that's going to give an overview, and then we're going to dig into your questions. So with that being said, our next panelist is Stephanie Nelson, the founder of Capital Pipeline. For those of you that don't know Stephanie, she spent 20 years doing business development in the construction industry. And so this is absolutely her brainchild of putting this data together. And so Steph, love to hear from your perspective of the person that's been in and out of this data for months and months and months on end, what your overview is with this.
Hi, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for attending. I'm very excited to share this year's new data. And just from, we'll go into the data itself in a little bit, but just from an overview perspective, I think there's a couple of big stories kind of coming out of the capital improvement plans this year. One are small, and this is significant to me because I've been reading these for 20 years now. I've never seen such a game change in our small and rural communities and our smaller counties. They've gone from, some of them from a line item in a budget form to fully fleshed out capital improvement plans. And I'm very excited to work with the league to help make that even easier for them. But where before you kind of didn't have the picture, and these water jobs you'd hear about that didn't even get bid on, and they were good sized. Now, I think that the smaller towns and cities are doing a really good job, and the data can show, it will show you kind of how they're improving their capital improvement plans. The other big story is just lining up with what everyone else has kind of told you, which is the capital improvement plans were taken over by infrastructure and transportation. There was a large increase in both of those sectors. Very wise as somebody who helped McCarthy through the Great Recession. You know, the definition of shovel ready was that it was in a budget and that it had some element of design. And so I think our cities acted fast to capitalize on the infrastructure and the potential transportation dollars that were going to come through federal and state grants. And so that's what the data shows. The data shows just a huge, over 75% of the pie. And that'll decrease a little bit as our higher education and some of the county books start to publish. But they have, you know, there's just a huge chunk of the pie that's going to infrastructure and transportation this year. And not very much spending on kind of the neighborhood beautification projects, historic preservation projects. You saw a lot of those kind of take a backseat this year, which again, from a business development and a former strategic planning perspective was the right thing to do. So those are the two big overviews, and I look forward to going through the data with everyone in a little bit.
Thank you. Thank you so much to our panel. Okay, I've got a couple big picture questions I'd like to hear each one of you address. So number one, this is a two-parter. What do you see as the biggest beneficial impact to Arizona with this spending? Where's the biggest hits that we're going to actually see the fastest? And Carrie, let's go ahead and start with you.
Oh no, start with somebody else. That's such a big question, Deidre. Oh, biggest beneficial impacts. Like there's what I hope and then what potentially there is, but I hope what I hope is what it is. And I would say exactly what Jim said, where we're seeing such investment in like the greater Phoenix area, and we've really got to build up our rural communities. So I would hope the biggest beneficial impact would be in those rural communities, that they can grow in the way that they want to grow and connect in the way that they want to connect. So that would be my biggest hope and what I hope.
Thank you. Thank you. Jim?
That's a tough one. Again, everything's so interconnected. You have to have good roads. You have to have good, communication infrastructure. Everything else is solid, electrical grid. I guess I would say the biggest individual one would probably be some major highway construction monies, because it'll be the biggest dollar amount. What I'd like to see, though, is for us to secure those basic ones and then be able to provide the complementary funding so that we could lift the state up even further. We have the rural issue that we've been talking about. Well, after going through COVID, there's a lot of opportunities for people. I'd like to see more of the physicians that are going to be retiring. There's a huge number. We're going to be losing a lot of those. We properly promote tourism in the state, and maybe we get some of them to locate in some of the rural communities. But they have access, quality access, so that we can participate in telemedicine and other things at an advanced level. And maybe they work 2 days a week in Payson or something like that. All of a sudden, we take care of a major healthcare problem in rural Arizona if we do this at a high level. So I would say the roads are the big one. I think there's some energy issues that we could deal with. That'll be a big one as well. And then we have maybe a dozen solid economic development ideas, like what I was just talking about, giving a couple of examples, where if we could get some support, and this is where I'd love to talk with Luis more, is how can we maybe increase the opportunity to get those funds? I guess I'll leave it at that.
Great, thank you. Stephanie?
Actually, I'm gonna let Luis go next because I have a little bit of a negative one, I think. So I'll let him go.
Well, the negative question's coming next. So.
Well, I think the biggest benefit, I think, is the ability that there's the possibility of funding out there that is creating this interest in the planning phase of projects. And so that's a process benefit, because we are finally getting attention and the right people in the room to talk about funding opportunities or ability to actually look at a lot of projects that would defer. I would say of state significance, I would agree with Jim on just the major widening of I-10, what I mentioned State Route 93 and some of the improvements that needs, in tangent with the consideration of Interstate 11. But I want to mention there in the infrastructure bill, there is, and I forgot to bring it up, it was in my next paragraph, but I was going over, which is the port infrastructure that is already in the budget. There is about over $600 million that Arizona will benefit in the 5-year plan that the General Services Administration has. That is about $300 million that will go into San Luis. Because 150 has already been allocated in the previous budget. There's another, roughly another 150 going into that is earmarked both in the federal budget this year and part of the larger package in the infrastructure bill. And there's significant, close to about 400, in the Douglas Port of Entry, the complete remake of Raul Castro and a new commercial port of entry in Douglas. Both sides, along with continual improvements that we need to focus in deepen CME, have ripple effects throughout the state, both on commerce, both on the mega region that we're a part of. And as we improve some of the roads that are the main connectors, improvements to I-19, 10, Interstate 8 and 17, I think it has a ripple effect. And not only,
sorry, go ahead.
Oh, and not only the ripple effect of like the demand of the priority because of this the investment, for example, in the ports, have a priority of trying to improve other corridors because it triggers an attraction of commerce. And so it benefits a larger net.
Great.
Luis is spot on that. And so the port in Douglas, the improvements, that's going to be giving opportunities. And we've been trying to give them some advice on how to build additional economic opportunity around that. Well, it's going to create some additional business opportunities, some storage opportunities. So commercial, it's going to be able to increase tax revenue so they can put in better infrastructure. So that port itself, even though it's an entry into all of Arizona, like we said, it's tied to other things as well. And this might be one of their biggest chances where they can kind of take a step up in terms of their economy. Now they have to do some quality local planning as well, but the provision of that funding is what's going to beget that additional higher quality growth in the community, and which will allow across the border additional economic opportunities. It'll end up improving our supply chain. And so that's one of the best examples I can think of where you have an infrastructure project that lifts so many other economic development things. So I'm glad that you brought that one up.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Stephanie, what do you think the biggest impact's going to be?
All right, so I'm going to talk about the industry side because I don't even do business development for the industry anymore, and it's waking me up at night anyway, which is the labor and commodities impact. We are already in one of the tightest markets that I remember. I'm sure my ops partners can go on ad nauseum about the situation that we're in, and that's before any of this money hits the system. And so one of the things that I think is going to be super important for the cities and the industry, and then really looking to people like Carrie, Jim, and Luis to help navigate this, is that the industry and the cities and the towns and counties and state and Fed start to communicate about the labor and commodities crisis that is coming. I heard on a political speech, and I almost guffawed. I was really embarrassed. They said, "We're creating 1,100 new pipe fitter jobs in Arizona." It's just, we don't even have enough pipe fitters for the jobs we have today, much less can we take 1,100 new labor requests in the next year. So I think, as this big glut comes down, I think we all need to be cognizant that we're in a strained labor market, we're in a strained commodities market. The supply chain is getting worse by the day. I'm sure you guys live that as just a personal life. And the only way we get through this is communication and partnership. And I know that we have this thing with cities and, we can't be inappropriate and we don't want to share information before the RFP. I think, and I'm going to challenge both sides, there's a way to communicate and coordinate that is not crossing that line in any way, shape, or form. You have the meeting with the entire industry, you invite everybody, and you ask before you issue that RFP, what's the situation, guys? Do you have any mechanical? You have to add, you have to start communicating in a way that you probably never have before. And I think partnerships and reaching out to your regular or your stable contractors, architects, engineers that have been with you, and start having those conversations now before we're, knee deep in it. So.
Right. So, for example, I was having a conversation with a colleague a few weeks ago, and she was like, I really wonder with TSMC, really starting to gear up here, that's going to suck so many resources. How's that even going to impact existing projects? And so we are at a really interesting time right now, I think, with all this influx of projects coming in when we're already in a shortage. So that being said, like, are there any downsides to this package coming towards us? And I'd offer that to any one of you to answer, honestly. What do you see as the downside?
I would say probably balancing opportunity with existing infrastructure improvements that need to happen and where that balance is. And I think probably to the question that was asked as well about sort of coordination and not fighting, like really relying on organizations like us, but also like the COGS and the NPOs, your planning organizations, I think are vital connectors in that realm to do this kind of planning and long range planning. Also thinking about, if you don't have, I'm going to harp on this until the day I die, having a strategic economic development plan for your community. Like, you don't know where your growth's going to happen. You don't know where you want to be in the next year or 5 years unless you have that kind of plan. And those kind of plans play directly into your these kind of projects, to the planning that you're going to do with your COGS, all of that kind of thing. So, my God, let's plan for the future.
Anyone else want to take that question on?
Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead, Luis.
Oh, I want to mention the planning. When we think about competition, I do think that it doesn't materialize to competition, both on the federal investment and the federal agencies that are looking at multiple applications. One case in point, at this point, like in the last month, we've been working with different communities and entities and organizations competing for the Economic Development Administration's Building Back Better planning grants there are challenge grants that have mega planning opportunities. And these programs and multiple organizations are looking at it. But I do think it fosters applications before these federal agencies and working documents that even if they do not get funded, they're roadmaps again. And then you look at the landscape of who else is competing. Our goal is to at least the hurdle and the challenge in this is that there's not like a clear definition of priority statewide. And if this group can continue to advance, like these are 4 major criteria that have ripple effects throughout the state. Let's adhere to these, and then those are opportunities for us to maximize that federal dollars. But the challenges are that this federal funding or local funding or the additional, I think as budgets are, the legislature for this year, for example, created a number of earmarks on transportation projects. I'm listening from communities that looks to be the route people are going to take instead of kind of investing in formulas and plans and other things. It is what it is. We can't fight the process, but learn from it. And as bills are submitted, for example, these are priority projects throughout the state. And if they don't get funded, those are roadmaps for offices like ours and the congressional delegation and the rest of this body to put them all together, prioritize, and kind of look at brainstorming. It's thinking about like a crowdsourcing funding plan when we do have these projects is a good exercise just for us to learn.
That's a great analogy. Jim, did you have something you wanted to add there?
Yeah, the risks are that to get the funding, there has to be a solid argument. It can't just be, we'd like to do a couple of things. The requirements are going to be tough, especially for the larger projects. But it's just as important if different communities get funds, they have to tie it to that economic development plan. And it doesn't even have to be a big fancy plan. Not every community has to have 100-page, $100,000 plan. They could have a to-do list for their major, players in the community for the next 6 months. So it can vary, but like with that Douglas example, tying it and making sure you leverage this very unique opportunity to take advantage of the economic development. So we could build a road in the middle of nowhere, make it the most beautiful, smooth road, take your car out there and do a little drag racing on it or whatever. There's no economic benefit from it. So it's the product, it's the type of product, it's the location of the product. And you also have to be careful. And there's a question in there earlier about how do you keep from competing with others? And that came up in one project in Southern Arizona, and the groups got together, and one group is going to focus a little bit more on something that's tangential to the other, and combined is going to make a great effort. And so they're not competing and one group's going to get the other. So we have to talk to one another and have partners. And that's where we need some higher level advisors to give these people, because not everybody's going to know, hey, there's a great opportunity for this community to team up with this COG. It could be something a little bit different, but as long as we keep communicating and having things like this discussion, the more that we can have this, then people will get some ideas. They'll, call their friend, they'll go out for a beer or lunch, and then they'll say, hey, wait, if we team up, we really might be able to increase our chance of getting the funding, and it'll be twice as effective. So communicating is important, I would say.
Thank you. And I love that you and Carrie both touched on strategic planning. As you both know, that's an absolute passion of mine, working with communities to do that. And really, I think having that solid roadmap for your own community, as well as coordinating with the ones around you to say, how can we capitalize on what each one of us is doing, is so key to really moving this forward in a good way. And I think, you said the word earlier, Jim, quality of growth, right? And I think that's the thing we've seen here in Arizona is just kind of this willy-nilly explosion over 50 years. And entities not coordinating with each other. And if they just had some simple planning in place and really were working together, we have so many entities for them to do that. We have the city, the League of City and States. We have, AAD. We have mechanisms for you all to do this within. And so I love that you're both focusing on getting each place to create a good strategic plan on how they're going to use these funds. And so coming on top of that, we've had two questions similar in this vein. And so, Luis, I want to start with you, because maybe not everybody is aware of, what are the different forms of funding that are coming, and how are people going to access these funds? What does a typical grant entail? Can you kind of give an overview on how are people even going to get these funds and not compete for them, to both everyone's point here? You're on mute, Luis.
Computer, the quickness and the click. I think there is a lot of technical assistance that's being kind of laid out, early dissemination of grant opportunities. Let me highlight Melissa McAllen at ASU does a great job on Rio Reimagine, but not just Rio Reimagine, but any water resource type of funding stream that is out there, both private and federal, and some state funding. These lists and information that comes down from that is a great kind of advanced planning mechanism. If we need to get more technical assistance on specific issues, just learning about it early. We've conducted several requests for federal agencies on technical assistance. For example, tomorrow, the SBA is holding a funding for the Gila Bend community because of the floods that they experienced. So SBA is having a technical assistant on how to access some of the disaster loans that are available for some of the businesses in that region. And so I think it's just asking, and then and if something's already planned, if not, let's work on planning these technical assistance workshops or webinars. And if they've already occurred, they oftentimes have a link that we can get that was recorded for us to communicate. So I think just being resourceful is a step of asking the question and then following up on what are some solutions to it.
What are all the different avenues the funding is going to come through that people should be aware of?
To the point that because most of these programs are already established federal agencies that have they're an expansion of some programs that are already in place. So I mean, USDA rural development or programs that are going to be set up like the RAISE grant and the Tiger grant and some other things that are already established. So there's already a template out there because that was the easiest way to get the money out instead of these new setups that will likely take time. We'll have to go through the rulemaking process. So if there is new funding in the bill, but I'm going to say a lot of the funding is already in pre-existing programs. So we already have a roadmap of what are the requirements and the criteria to make an application strong. So let's focus on what we know right now. The rulemaking will be long if there is a particular new setup that are parts of the bill, but not the majority of it. So I want to default on what's already there.
Great, thank you. We have a couple Q&As that were typed in that our panelists have been answering off on the side, but a few of these I really want everybody to be able to hear the answer to. So Stephanie, this is going to be directed at you because you already answered it. We had Bill Regner ask, what are some effective strategies that small rural communities can take to accomplish building out their projects when they may be on the last priority list for engineers, contractors, and suppliers? Such a valid question. So I'd love, Stephanie already answered it online, so I'm going to let her go first, but I'd love to hear from the other panelists if they have an answer as well. Steph, you're on mute.
Thanks. That's one of the reasons that we're so excited to partner with the League of Cities and Towns, Arizona Cities and Towns, is our mission is, kind of not just about the data and the industry, but is helping the cities and towns communicate with each other and have more access to the industry. So when Tom Belshie should be sending out to all the cities and towns of your free membership to Capital Pipeline. So you're going to be able to get on Capital Pipeline and look at other communities and see across 36 fields all the different information that other cities and towns may or may not be providing. In addition to that, Tom and the League and I we've decided to publish a CIP builder, which will be a capital basic tool that will have a form that will allow you to put the information in or upload it in an Excel spreadsheet that will make you look at, from a comparative perspective, like the larger cities and towns that are doing that have more resources on their capital improvement plans. I don't think what I would say about the capital improvement plans as somebody who's been reading them forever, the snazziness is not nearly as important as the information in it. So if you're making, and there's some cities that, God love you, you spend time on graphics and maps, and some of them are just absolutely beautiful. And I'm going to break your heart when I scroll by half of it because it's completely irrelevant to why am I looking at it. I had a wonderful conversation with Anthony Jeffers, who's on the call from HP yesterday. And we talked a lot about, it's not just about the line item or the total and the title. It's you as a business developer or as a project director or as an architect or engineer, you have to bring that case, especially now. And this is something the cities and towns have to think about. When work is this tight, you don't just get to pursue projects. The industry people will know this term, go, no go. It's a meeting that happens where the ops team, the estimating team, the business development team, and leadership team get in a room and fight over, when it's a tight market like this, who gets to pursue their job. And so to give that complete picture, spend some time on the description. It kills me when people have 3 pages of graphs and they have 1 sentence on their description. That's what the operations people want to look at, is the budget, the description, the timing. If I could make a collective suggestion to you all, if you started to put it into quarter and let people know when it's going within a quarter, not just within the year, you will get more activity. You will get more people looking at you, because knowing a wastewater job is coming sometime in 2023 is significantly different than knowing it's coming in Q1 or Q2 from an estimators and an industry perspective. And so I think just be detailed, give all the information you can. We'll give you forms so that you know what the industry is looking for. And then less on the graphs, more on the details, and collectively, if you could all start working in quarters, I think the industry would be forever grateful.
That's a great point. And that, again, it kind of circles back to this thing that's happening here with, we already have mega projects that are absolutely sucking all these resources. So helping people be able to make better business decisions on going after your work from the construction side is super helpful. Speaking of, so one of the things I really think is interesting, and Jim, you kind of touched on this before, is, I moved to Arizona in 2004. So I kind of came in the middle of explosive growth. The Great Recession hit the day I started consulting. That was fun. And, we always talked through this whole time of, let's make sure we learn our lessons. Let's make sure. Do you feel like we've learned our lesson? And I'd love to hear it from Carrie's perspective too, as someone who's newer to Arizona. Do you feel like we've learned our lessons here? Is this really, are we going to be smart about this? Or are we just going to keep doing what Arizona does and just build until we blow it again? What do you think?
I'll be a little bit risky with the comments. I feel like staff, the economic development community, the economic development organizations, they understand it. Policymakers, maybe about a quarter. And that's because when they get into politics, they're given the book of dogma based on the party that they check off, and they stick with that until they're done half the time. There are some that do a good job and they learn over time, but you might, and this influences the types of projects. And so, for example, let's say an air park. Air parks are going to be discussed quite a bit at the local level. In some cases, it makes sense to maybe put in for some funding for some air park infrastructure. In other cases, it makes no sense. The analysts within the different communities or the advisors might say, this is a great idea. And it's a great idea because, and you list out the because. You need that because in order to get the grant. So in a way, the process kind of filters out some of the bad ideas, but I think we have to do a little bit more research and understand the connections when we want to build things. And funds are limited at the local level. And even if you get a grant for something, if you're going to get a grant for something, you want to utilize it for something highly effective. So I think we need more analytics in that ROI discussion going forward, even though we've been making advances. And I think that we need to communicate to leaders and give them the tools so that they could make good decisions. So really the onus is on us to help our elected leaders make good decisions. And the ones that are open to getting feedback are the ones that are going to be, have the biggest impact on their community or state going forward. And then another issue is, you mentioned the mega projects. That's put a lot of pressure on certain communities' budgets, putting in the infrastructure. We have something going in Arizona that isn't sustainable without having more foundational items. We are not going to keep growing these high wage jobs if we don't have the workforce that's necessary. We're not going to keep landing these big plants unless we make sure we support the land department so they're truly an economic development entity. And we make sure that the communities have access to monies to connect these big businesses, because they don't come here and say, what we have one reason why we're going to locate here. They come here and say, here's a dozen primary items that we're going to look at. We want to see where you stand on those. And so that has to happen going forward. And it sounds complicated, but it's really not. It's thinking about, it's kind of applying business principles to government in a way. So I'm still very optimistic, but we have to invest a little bit more.
Absolutely. Carrie, I'd love your perspective on this.
No, I think Jim and I are definitely in the same boat on this one. I do think, as mentioned before, we've done so well on a state level of getting these businesses here, this industry here, and it's amazing for Arizona. But just having an overall plan, even a very simple plan for quality growth, I think would be incredibly helpful as we navigate whatever might be ahead. And then so much, I think in the past, like something like workforce development and economic development were very separate. And I do think as economic developers, we're looking holistically at what economic development is and how it does affect that quality of life. So now, businesses have site visits, they're bringing along their community college representative. or their representative from a college, because that tie to workforce is so important, and some of these other kinds of industries that have not really been related to economic development before. So, I think we're leaps and bounds from where we were. Coming from California, I would say it is so easy to do business in Arizona. That we definitely have that going for us. So I'm an optimistic person, and I only see sort of potential in the future. But we do have underlying things that we need to address, like rural development, and workforce and quality jobs, and all those kinds of things. So we're not there yet, but man, I think we're in a much better position than we were.
Great. All right, as we're closing in on this portion of the program today, I'd love to hear from each one of you. If you had one thing you wanted to leave our attendees with today, what would that one message be? And Stephanie, we'll go ahead and start with you. And you're on mute.
About that, I don't want everyone to hear my. I would encourage people to start looking at the data and look at the information that the cities are publishing, and vice versa. Cities start to really communicate about that data and the actual information, and don't spend so much time for the public sector on the word on the street. It's my experience with cities and towns that they're pretty dang ethical, and they're not going to give you any secret information. You spend your time developing out your plan, your strategy, your labor force, your relationships, and just look at the whole picture.
Thank you. Carrie?
Oh, I would say like capital improvement projects are sexy. Like if we can get that out there, say, so much of it is about planning. It's about the future, and how important they are to communities. And I also, what we saw when the EDA grants came down, were communities that were in a position that had already dreamed big were able to say, oh, I've got this plan. I can easily submit a proposal. I can get that funding. So if the communities hadn't dreamt big, it was really difficult in that short amount of time to pull things together to get that project off the ground and to submit a grant. So I would say, like, right now, start dreaming big. Start thinking about your community, what you need to invest in your community, so that when funds come down and there's availability, like, you can easily throw that together, know who your partners are, and be able to get that funding for your community.
Thank you. Yes, I agree. Infrastructure is sexy. Jim, one big takeaway.
Is infrastructure sexy, really?
I think it is.
Yes, Jim, absolutely.
I would say know your community. Know your community, because the most effective use of taxpayer dollars, regardless of where it comes from, is you build on your current strengths. And then the next step, as you continue to grow, is you build on your tangential strengths or tangential projects. And then when things are really picking up, you can get into some wholly new things. And so, like the Douglas example that Luis brought up, that was a really good one on building on something that's happening and building on the strengths of that community, knowing who they are. And that sounds like it's simple, but not every community really has a great feel for who they are and what their potential is, and how one particular industry that they're involved with uses the same inputs as another one, and maybe they should be marketing after those two. So a little self-reflection, and then I'll think about that capital improvement concept being sexy. I'm an economist, so I think I just broke some cardinal rule. Yes, it's awesome.
Luis.
I mean, to Jim's, asset-based strategies are usually the best approach when you build on your assets and you understand your assets to either be improved, maximized, or improved on efficiencies. So we try to really work on those, because we can improve some corridors in our local communities, or some water infrastructure projects that will expand our ability to attract a particular industry, for example, or some other items. And so if I would say that the path least traveled sometimes is right in front of you, because it is already there. And I just want to stress that we add, for example, on workforce development, our our shortages in healthcare workers. There's so many, the need to attract more nurses and the need to attract more medical professionals. The continuum of learning in that industry is already there with individuals focused in that. And so it's just moving somebody from a medical assistant to an RN, to that RN becoming a nurse practitioner. And throughout life, especially as we have a diverse population that has different educational attainment, look at the tracks of economic development instead of saying that everybody's going to be an engineer. For example, there are technicians that our community colleges are advancing based on the demand on applications. So our community colleges are doing an amazing job. They have a good template. They're recognized nationally. They're leaders nationally on setting up the standard. So I think they're doing really innovative. And so I would ask local communities to check in and look at what they're planning, what's on the catalog right now, what they're planning, what their certificates, programs, and that will give you a really good roadmap to what to kind of attract for, and then be in a very persuasive. I do want to, the Senate yesterday passed a unanimous consent to expand the definition of, a bill that allows municipalities and states and local governments to use COVID relief funds on transportation needs and disaster loans, disaster events. And so that is moving through legislation, and it's pretty much widely supported. So there could be a bill signed allowing us more flexibility. More to come. I know I'm going to get further questions on this. That was just yesterday. It was sponsored by, we were a co-sponsor with the bill with Senator Padilla and Cornyn on just making sure that there is flexibility at the local level. And that could have a lot of good impacts with these COVID relief funds that are right now in our bank accounts in our local governments. So
great, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the takeaways I heard come out of every single one of your mouths is communities doing better strategic planning and tying, their overall planning to economic development, to the communities around them. And so that being said, especially if you're a smaller community, other than hiring a private consultant like myself or Jim, how do communities get help with strategic planning? Carrie or Luis probably are the best. Like, are there resources for these people that might need to bring in a facilitator to help them kind of understand that bigger picture and how to work together and so on? So could either one of you address that?
Yes, definitely look to your utility partners. If APS isn't in your area, look to your other utility partners, but I do know APS has funded a lot of economic strategic plans around the state. They're a great partner, and definitely utilize them for help on your bringing in an outside facilitator for that. But I will also say, I think it was to Jim's point, you don't need a full-blown crazy, 100-page strategic plan either. Right. Getting your community in a room and talking about these issues and what bubbles up is going to be a great start to a plan for your community too.
That's such a valid point.
Strategic plans,
right? They don't need to be 1,000-page documents. Sometimes we do them on A3s and it's one page, but at least you put your vision down, right? And are all moving in the same direction. Luis, do you have any resources for them?
I think a good roadmap is, especially shout out to Local First working on the Arizona Recovery Center to kind of learn from the work that they've been doing. I know that they have a focus. The senator sponsored the Community Navigator program specifically, and they're competing for a $5 million grant that hopefully will give them more resources to do some technical assistance on the ground. But it is a need. I would highlight that there is a need for our kind of like technical writers, grant writers. We meet with local communities that sometimes don't have that expertise on the ground. And so if more APSs of the world and other folks are maybe not on the plan, the planning process is extremely important. So that lays out the framework, but the hurdle is just having technical assistance on the ground. And so if someone or this group takes on as a project, as homework, putting together like a list of folks that are skilled in CDBG, kind of frameworks that understand federal kind of like layouts. Those are important resources for local communities that sometimes are just struggling to try to attract someone to assist on an application.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much. All right, we are just about done with this portion before we get into the actual preview of the data. Any last questions from our audience out there? I'll give it another minute if you're typing in the chat box. No? Okay, well, we've still got a ways to go. So if you have questions, feel free to type them into that Q&A portion. Panel, thank you so much. This was just great insight into what's happening in our state. We thank you for your time this morning. And with that, we are going to move on to the next portion of today's program, which is the review of the data. So with that, I'm going to hand this back over to Stephanie Nelson and Tom Belshie. Steph, you've got your screen share set up. All right, we're good.
Just real quick, if you drop off the call right now and you'd like to see a preview of the data, if you go to capitalpipeline.tech and request a guest pass, you'll get a guest pass and you'll see the data, and then we'll have a video up later that you can view the preview. So
thank you for saying that.
Tom, I was gonna let Tom's gonna start.
And again, if you have questions, type them in the Q&A. I'll be flagging them to answer questions as we move along, so please don't be shy.
I want to also reiterate the importance of planning. Planning. The reason that we got so excited about working with Capital Pipeline is because a lot of times the discussion about capital infrastructure at the local level is largely anecdotal. You have somebody come up and complain to an elected official in the grocery store about a pothole, and that's what starts our capital, improvement conversation. What we hope that comes out of this is that no matter where you're at as a community, so let's start with those communities that have never developed a capital improvement plan. Well, then here's your opportunity to go in with a capital improvement plan builder, to sit down and talk about what your what your priorities are. Well, how do you prioritize capital improvement? Well, we've had great discussions about that here today. What things are needed for economic development? What things are needed for quality of life? What things are most important to the community locally? Well, you can start having those conversations, and there are lots of resources. Local First Arizona, there are resources about, we get lots of questions, and I'm a little disappointed, frankly, and I'm the league.
Uh-oh, Tom's having a little bit of internet connectivity issues this morning. It looks like you froze up on us.
We set up a process. Were you able to hear me at all and anything that I said? No? Okay. I was afraid, and this is the one time that it cut out. It's just
pandemic life, Tom. It
was so profound. You will not.
Sure.
It was. So anyway, planning is extremely important. That's what's come out of this. And so what does that mean? That means that you have to tie your use of this money to all of your important planning documents, your general plan, your budget, and the capital improvement plan. I think that we would all be surprised at the number of communities that don't even have one. So if you don't, this is what got us excited about being a part of Capital Pipeline in the first place. We have an opportunity to develop something that you're all going to be able to use, that you'll have a license to use. And that is, okay, I've never done a capital improvement plan before. What do I do? Well, here's a builder. But before you can use the builder, you have to talk about what are our priorities. Well, how do you determine the priorities? Well, they're determined by what you're focusing on locally. Some communities are very focused on economic development because they've solved their other problems. Some communities just have some severe infrastructure deficiencies. And so they're going to have to focus on the quality of life things first. But one thing, and I know that there are a lot of rural participants today, one thing that I will say to the rural communities is you need to stop thinking individually so much. you're going to have a much easier time getting the money and getting things done if you work with the cities and towns that are close to you. Now, some of you are very remote, but the vast majority of you, there's at least one other community very, very close to you that you can talk about these things with. I'm going to tell just a quick story. There was a community that was talked into, and I don't want to speak ill of our construction and engineering brethren who might be on the call here, but they were talked into building a package sewer plant that they really didn't need and couldn't even afford the electricity to keep it open. So it sat in mothballs for a long time while the community that was up above them on the plain that they share a common boundary also was running into problems of capacity with their sewer system. So if they had spoken to one another, it took 7 years to accomplish this, by the way. If they had spoken to one another, they would have found out that they could have sent that extra capacity that they had downhill with no booster pumps right into the sewer plant of this other community. 7 years it took, and a lot of, because of rivalries locally. And I hope that rural communities will understand that large governments, federal and state governments, unfortunately, they don't care necessarily about your small, it may be very, very important to you, but they look at dollar amounts and they look at getting that money out the door. That's how they're set up. So if you want to take advantage of that, you're going to have to think regionally. You're going to have to think regionally. Also, you have regional economic development corporations. You have Local First Arizona. The league, and as I was saying, I was a little disappointed. The league set up a system by which we could have a Microsoft team environment where people could come in and leave questions and get responses. Also, we have some federal partners that come through the National League of Cities that can answer questions about how cities and towns are supposed to spend this money. And you know what? For those of you who are thinking about, how you're going to use that money, I don't think anybody's going to blame anyone if you use some of that money to plan. We can't focus enough on the importance of knowing exactly why you're going to put something in the ground, exactly why you're going to spend the money that you have to spend. And those partners can help you to describe that in your grant, applications, as well as when somebody comes out and audits what you're doing or takes a look at what you're doing for those federal dollars. This is a big step in order to know what's going on. If you have a license to Capital Pipeline's information, you can see what your region is doing about a certain type of infrastructure project. And if there's a chance to piggyback, or maybe, they're putting in some kind of sewer, or maybe they're putting in some kind of broadband, and you can take advantage of that by partnering with them, by doing IGAs. Those are the kinds of things that we think are very applicable from this. And we think all 91 cities and towns are going to find use from this. And then also for the league, it's really important to have this data when we're talking to the legislature about the importance of infrastructure development. Having good, honest information that we can provide to them to say, this is what's really going on out there. This is what cities and towns, this is where the deficiencies are, and this is where they're trying to spend their money. And if we have that data, unfortunately, at the state level, there's not as much investment in data as we would like to see. So it's going to be up to the private sector and local governments to create that data and to make good decisions about how the money is spent. Because if we do that, we're going to get a lot of support from that. Anecdotal evidence is just that. Data-driven decision-making is extremely important, and this product will help you to do that. And so with that, I'll leave it to Stephanie to talk about her wonderful product, and happy to answer any questions about how I see this could be applicable to cities and towns.
Thank you, Tom. That was really, really pertinent information you just shared. Thank you so much. All right, Stephanie.
Thank you,
Should I
Tom.
drum roll? I need the drum roll for you here.
I put it up. I just want to thank Tom and the league. Their commitment and their passion for this and getting the cities involved, and then also we'll be getting the counties involved, is taking the data and it's making it accessible and usable to in a way that it's just such an honor. So thank you, Tom and the league, and all the hard work that Matt and Renee and the entire team has done. Okay, ta-da! So this is about 70% of the capital improvement plans that will be in. Something that a little difference that people may not understand is they do have to issue their budgets by the end of July, but they do not have to publish their books. And their books is where they put their capital improvement plans of any description. So we're about 75% of the way there. And I put these numbers up on the side so you can see kind of tracking where we're at. Last year we were with the same communities. I only entered the same community so we could do apples to apples. We were at 26.5, and this year we're at 32.6. Last year we were at about 4,400 projects, and this year we're at 53.5 or 5350. So you can see that there's been a pretty sizable increase. As I said, the story of the community, and every community, is the types of projects. So we're going to click down and drill down by market sector so you can see what everybody on the phone has been saying. But it's going to be a story of infrastructure and transportation and aviation. And you'll see this across every community, no matter what. The pie sizes are a little bit smaller, the number of projects. This is City of Phoenix, of course. So there's, just in the infrastructure, there's 403 projects. And it's worth approximately $4.7 billion over the next 5 years. So and all of the data is kind of telling the same story. This is ADOT is in here, so this is a little misrepresented, but you can see the different market sectors and kind of the participation. And again, higher education, the universities don't issue their plans yet, haven't issued their plans yet, so please disregard that.
Stephanie, can I stop you for 1 second? For those of us who have not been looking at this data for months on end, would you mind just taking a step back and explaining to the audience exactly what they're looking at here? What is Capital Pipeline? What is this data? Because there's a lot of people new to the product here.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm terrible about
I know you went straight in, but can we step back and give an overview first?
The selling part of this is not my favorite. I'm excited to share the data and show everybody kind of what's going on in the state.
Right.
So
what is Capital Pipeline?
Capital Pipeline is a combination of every capital improvement plan, city, county, and state agency. By the end of October, we will also have FedBizOps in here. So it will literally be a one-stop look at every public sector job in Arizona that's planned or published. So each entity has a little bit different publishing, and each entity has a very different format. So after they're published, we put all the raw data in, and then we standardize information so that for industry folks who are looking for specific projects. Some of the information that we've standardized is market sector, so that, in some communities, parks may be called parks, and another may be called community services. So in our system, we standardized it as parks and recreation, even though we still list the contracting department. We also standardize project type, and this is something that continues to be added to and developed. Last year, we had 52 categories. This year, we have 78. Our clients, our wonderful early clients, came back to us and said, could you add this? Could you add this? Could you add this? And they were all great. So we added them all. The stage is it's a little bit of a misrepresentation. It's what's the kind of project is it? Is it only a design project? Is it a project that's already in process? Is it inspection, maintenance? We standardize the calendar year, the first spend year. So in the capital improvement plans, they'll list it. We actually just identified it so you could search to a year. And then obviously we have county, city, and the project size that we've kind of made. Reset. So this is the visualization of the tool, of the data. The data itself is down here, and this is literally a list of every single project, capital improvement project in the state of Arizona, and the details that they have. There's also a link so that you can see the actual description. So if you want to see a project and you don't trust that I have all the goods in there, you can click on it and see the document itself. And if there's any additional information in the capital improvement plan that's pertinent to the project, this would be more than a one-page document, and it would be attached underneath the project sheet. So.
Right. And so just to stop you right there, because we did have a question earlier about how can I get my project as a small community to be more attractive to people? And when Stephanie said, write a better description, that's exactly what she's talking about. And so when we're on the construction and design side, planning what projects we're going to go after, this is the info we're looking at to make those business decisions. So even if you're a small community, if you have a really robust description, it's going to increase the visibility and desirability of that project for you. So I was holding that question so that I could see this and answer it. So sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to talk about it when it was appropriate.
I'm glad I pulled up Prescott. This is a perfect, and if it weren't turned on the side, leave it front top adjusted, because we all look at things at digitally these days. But the description, right? They have a detailed impact description. They have a detailed justification. They have priorities, which is really nice, because that kind of gives people a sense of how much or how early are they going to be pushing that funding. And then they have all the, by all 5 years mapped out. So we can see, as an industry, we can see exactly, okay, this project is not going to hit until 2024 fiscal year. And that way the project can be planned for. And what, again, go no goes in some companies happen 2-3 years before a project hits RFP. If they see it in the capital improvement plan, they'll make plans under, they'll have those discussions early on. So this is an ideal, I think, if there's a couple of, and Prescott isn't the only one by any means, but they did a really good job of having complete project descriptions, which helps.
Thank you. Sorry for interrupting, but I wanted to capture that question. Proceed.
This is the map. This is kind of the current data, and then if you go to the next next tab, this is a one I built just for today. It will just have this year. But this is a comparison between last year and this year. And again, you can see the transportation and the collective pie on transportation and infrastructure has increased. When the counties, which again, there's some counties that don't have their full information out yet, this number will increase the infrastructure, because that's primarily all that the counties do is infrastructure and transportation. And so again, the story is the same in every graph. It's water, wastewater. You see the blue, the infrastructure, the transportation projects, and then there's a smattering of other. There is a new. You brought up the EV, the electric stations, EVs charging stations. There's also a huge and increasing every year fiber optic cable and Wi-Fi network. There's an enormous, and I'll break that down in just a second, but just real quick. And for all of those people who are responsible to actually go get the projects, this last tab has the city website, the RFP site, and the project management group that may be in charge of those different projects. But you guys were talking, one of the things you guys were talking about was, don't be afraid to spend money. There are some cities out there who very smartly have put some marketing dollars out there. Like, there's not a lot, but there's a $120,000 marketing project to recommunicate the community's goals and to rebrand and do is what was similarly done to Apache Junction, which I happen to think did a brilliant job, and looking up and getting people to think about the mountains and the beauty of Apache Junction. They're going to be doing that same thing. So you guys could put your capital or your master plan, your strategic plans in your capital improvement plans, and get more information. So with that, I will leave it open to some questions, or if anyone has wants to see any data Lee, I can move it around for us.
Yes, so we have a question already from Mike Riggs regarding capital pipeline information. Do you have COG's 5-year CIP separately from local agency, state and county CIPs? So the city of government's 5-year CIP, is that put in there separately?
So the state, all of the CIPs are put in independently. So I'm not sure if that's the question.
Yes, well, they're just asking if the League of, if the city of government's CIP has been put in there as well.
No, not yet. I have there are that, and this year I'll be adding that, the federal biz ops, and then I have the transportation districts in there. There's some water districts that do some publishing that aren't capital improvement plans per se, but are detailed budgets, and those will be in by the end of October.
Council of Governments, sorry, MAG, PAG, etc. He's asking if these larger groups
so
overall plans have been put in.
They all of their for the most part, I'm not going to say all, the vast majority of the plans in those plans are assigned a lead, and the lead then has it in their capital improvement plan. So what I am doing, and will be done by the end of October, is where there's a link, if they have an association or if they're in a MAG or if they're in another group, and that project, will be linking to that project description as well. But in almost all cases, they have to have a lead assigned entity.
Perfect. Okay. We had a question from Bill Regner. Clarkdale's CIP contains projects that we believe we can fund on our own or with existing granting opportunities. We have 2 projects on NACOG's regionally significant project list that are geared to the state and federal infrastructure funding that we expect is coming. Are there steps we need to take to further those 2 projects and additional projects that may be possible because of the increased federal funding that were not perceived as possible previously? So that's a really interesting question. So something's already in the works. How does that affect with new funding coming in? And perhaps someone else might be able to take that question. I'm not sure that I don't know the answer for sure.
Yeah.
Luis?
Is he still with us?
He is. He did actually type in an answer earlier, but Luis, are you still with us here?
Maybe.
Yes, I am. I was just taking a call.
Oh, no worries. So basically, Bill, whose question you had answered earlier in the chat, he wanted to ask it live so that everybody could benefit from the answer on that. So would you mind readdressing that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be a good exercise to host, like for the COG to host these projects and do some, like I was mentioning, some brainstorming, crowdsourcing type of, where the COG already has an idea about some eligible pots of money, but we can invite members of the delegation in that region to kind of figure out if there's additional information that we could have as a task. And so I know I'm looking at a micro level type of a conversation, but that's what's needed with the details that are sometimes presented, especially if there is mixed funding packages on so local, state, and federal resources. So it's good for federal offices from the delegation to understand that mix. And so I would recommend to invite the delegation to these kind of once a list of significant projects are identified that are yet to be funded or are multi-year, for us to hold. We do this similar process a lot of times with our defense industry groups that target major military construction. Now the agency, the installations don't lobby or advocate, but other projects are, we're made aware of them early. So we are able to advocate for major military construction projects and base installations. So I'm using that idea in a much more localized level.
Okay. Bill, did that answer your question? Right, you can type your response in for me and we'll come back to you if needed. So we've got two from Anthony A.J. Jeffers over at Hensel Phelps. Number one, Stephanie, first question for you. The volume of work calculated in the upper left corner is the total value of all projects currently in the capital pipeline database from CIP plans captured for 2021 and 2022. Is that correct? And I believe you do not have all of them in yet. You addressed that in the beginning, correct?
Yeah, so all of those, I said there were about 70%. The universities, some counties, and then there are a few cities, although Avondale just went this week and I got them in last night. So the cities are publishing those books that have the details on the capital improvement plans. I would anticipate that all the data will be in, I would think hopefully within the next week. They're coming out by the day. And then we'll also have FedBizOpps integrated by the end of October. So that number will increase, but we're about 70%. And yes, that is the total as far as what's in the system so far.
Thank you. And then he had a follow-up question. Thank you, AJ. We appreciate your participation here. And so we do have a mixed audience today. We have people from the cities and states, but we also have people on the design and construction side. And so he asked a very appropriate question here, which I think, you know, most of us on our side are looking at is, can you walk us through the process of how a user would use this database to find a specific project, like an aviation project, to be considered for evaluation to pursue? So if you were, say, a business developer or an ops guy or an estimator, a supply chain person, and you're trying to understand what am I looking at here? Can you kind of walk them through how
Sure.
a BD person might use this database as well?
Sure, thank you. That's a great question. So this was designed not just for business development folks, but also for ideally it was that go no go session where there's kind of a representative from each part of the team, and they're all looking at the same information from very, very different perspectives. And so this was designed for that conversation. So BDs could use it to find a tool, but it should be able to be a little bit broader than that as well. The first thing, and this is one of the reasons I standardized market sector, was to make this part very easy. What I want to do is get the BDs out of the business of just reading CIPs and their marketing people. On occasion, a project director. What happens with capital improvement plans is they get spread out throughout the office, and you'll lose the opportunity that you may see some of these other projects out here. There's $112 million in aviation projects in planning in Prescott. You know, this is statewide, so these are some of the rural ones. Seligman has, you know, they have a rural airport. Now, not every general contractor, certainly Hensel Phelps, is going to be going after these larger projects, right? So one of the other things that we did was talk about, you know, being able to, if you are, say, a smaller contractor and you only work in Maricopa County, I would pull this down and look just at Maricopa County so that I had a better idea of what was going on. And then I just, you know, get down to the data and look at the specific projects by amount. I mean, I think a lot of times the total is the thing that's the most compelling, and you know, but you can also filter or sort and get just the amounts. So if you're, again, a small contractor and you only work on the, you know, $1 to $5 million projects, I would encourage you to use those filters and sorts to get down, or you can just do the easy sort. So when you're in a discussion with your ops team and you're fighting for your project, or you're trying to get your team assigned or any of those other important things, you have not just the project that you want, but you have the projects that's surrounding those projects. So there's, I'm sure for the operations people, the BDs on the industry people on the phone, you know, or on the call, we've all had the situation where the mystery project of the future derails a project that we have. The bird in the hand is the mystery better project in the bush. And you lose 6 months of work because somebody heard something about something, that a water treatment plant is coming somewhere sometime. And that's what this is designed to stop. Is no, okay, we know exactly the water jobs or the infrastructure or the aviation jobs that are going on in the Phoenix market. So we're gonna drill down, and again, you can drill down a little further if you want and look at the CIP spending year. So that they have, I've got it, so I can't see. I've got too many things looking at here, but you can see the, oop, there we go. Oh, that's Phoenix. Here we go. Sorry, I apologize. Let me reset that. Oop, reset. So there's the 1,130 aviation projects. Oh, not aviation projects. Let's see, aviation projects. There we go again. So we have the viewing the underlying data. So what I would do is, again, look through these projects. There's 82. I would look at the totals, kind of sort down to my team's particular needs, and then I would likely print out all the project sheets because or attach them to my files so that the other parts of the team know that, look, if you need to see it in detail, here's all the detail that the city provided. And then after that, I would spend time looking at using the map to see what else is going to be going on at that same time in the same area that either is going to be competitive from an operations, a labor draw, a commodities draw, and then being aware of the other teams that'll be active and how many people will likely be on those bidder lists based on, okay, this year there's only 7 other projects in Maricopa County running or that we know about. So there'll be, you know, a bid list of 10 and we probably shouldn't pursue that job versus one of these smaller communities where there's not going to be that same competition. So
Right.
That's a long answer.
Right.
Sorry.
No, that's a great answer. That's a great answer. And so there was a follow-up here too, saying, you know, only 70% means that we still have roughly maybe $10 more billion worth of projects that are out there on the way.
Yes.
And so again, to that question earlier about competing for manpower on your projects, how am I going to get a designer? How am I going to get a contractor? Right. And so you can clearly see now the CIPs, you're competing with other people's CIPs. And so the better descriptions you can put out, the better attraction you can have to your projects is what's going to do it right now, because it's such a competitive market to get smaller projects done, especially, you know, from, again, a BD Ops side of, you know, what's your contractual mechanism, or, you know, can we contract with this smaller entity? So really, you know, thinking about, you're competing for people to come do this work. How are you going to make it easy for them? What's your permitting department look like? I know one of the things that really I thought was interesting during the recession was, you know, permitting departments were, you know, not serving the industry, let's put it that way, right? And so, you know, many of the economic development branches of cities got involved in permitting departments and said, we better make a better user experience here because we need to get all these permits done that we can to keep money flowing here. So again, I think it comes back to having a really good plan for your entire community. Okay, we've got another question here. Jonna Bricky with DFDG. With most local municipalities CIP approvals happening in June and July, how are updates accomplished throughout the rest of the year? So how are you keeping this data up to date, Stephanie?
So that's one of the topics that is kind of, I'm working with our early clients and partners to kind of work through what parts of this should be updated and what parts aren't going to be updated. What Capital Pipeline is not is an RFP notification service or a leads development service, or again, that word on the street update of details that have been issued outside of the city's specific budget. I have a passion for data. We have a passion for good data. And so the only way to do that is to have first source information. And so once I get beyond that first source information, as far as word on the street and more details, updates, it becomes less reliable, and it's also not official. So you might have a city council meeting that people say, oh, there was a huge update on the park. Okay, well, I'll go back and I'll review it. And there was a big discussion on the park. And as BDs, if you're chasing parks in Mesa, I would hope that you were watching those discussions, but there's nothing to update from a budgetary perspective. So I'm not going to be updating the budgets as they may be, you know, as the cities move around their priorities and they issue RFPs. That's not something you'll see here. You can see the links and you'll be able to access the, you know, sign up for those. If you see a project in a city that you're interested in, you can go to that and sign up for the RFP notifications. And I encourage you to do it that way and not to pay for an outside service, because each city has their own system that they use. But that's the short answer. Is the things that we'll be updating, however, are ADOT because of ESTIP and FedBizOps, because those are updated regularly, and that will be a live update. So not to get into the details, but I've been working on bot automation. It's going to sit there, and just anytime something comes into either of those systems, it'll be automatically pulled into Capital Pipeline.
Great, thank you. And then tailing on a discussion from earlier today, you know, where we talked about we're in such a deficit right now of manpower, of materials, of just the supply chain's a mess all over the place, right? So how can this tool be used to help companies better plan in general?
So, you know, we had an interesting conversation with Anthony yesterday. From the company side, and I think Tom touched on the city side, but from the company side, in its best form, the lead is just a very small piece of what the data could do for a company. For me, you know, again, back to that go, no go, to the estimating department, to the scheduling department, to understanding labor strain and whether or not you're going to prioritize that job and bid that job or pursue that job. I think the completeness of the information, you have to know what else is going on in the labor market right now to be able to properly estimate. I think Anthony said that nobody's letting their bids stand, or their proposals are only good for like 5 to 7 days right now, because pricing is changing so dynamically. So my hope is that this data, you know, and I was very excited by my conversation with him, because he got, you know, that Hensel Phelps does so much work in this space. He understands kind of how that data could be used on the ops side. And that's where that's when I get really excited about it, because you can plan and do, have more profitable projects, have higher win ratios, have better run jobs. The cities get better, you know, better bids. It's just kind of great all around for both the industry and the city when we start looking at the whole picture. And then not, you know, I hate hearing stories of general contractors losing money on jobs because of labor issues and things like that. So.
Right. And then Tom, I know you're still on the line here. Again, I'd love to circle back on this and talk about how, you know, communities are kind of working in silos a little bit, and how this tool might help them to better coordinate their own programs as well as with other people's programs. And, you know, how can they best use this to their advantage? Because they're getting free subscriptions. So how can they best use this?
So when they have their subscription, they can take that and do the searches that they're talking about. And when they're prioritizing their projects, they can see if there are similar projects available, or if they have something that they want to spend money on, is there something similar in another community. Larger communities all the time take advantage.
Uh-oh. And he's still there. So I think he's just have a little internet pause here. We'll give him a second to come back. All right, Steph, is that a question you feel comfortable answering?
I can certainly show an example of what would be ideal. So this is Pinal
Great.
County. I know Mayor McFarland and some of the folks down there real well from having worked on the transportation bill. But, you know, this is all of the projects. But if they were to work together, they're using their tool, they could say, let's look at the transportation projects and see what we've got going on and say, whoop, whoop. And, you know, they could actually start to look at their projects together and say, okay, you know, if they wanted to look at street street and sidewalk projects. Oopie. And now we know Coolidge and Casa Grande have a list of street and sidewalk projects. They can find out. And I know everybody's experienced this when you know, a beautiful road that's being built up to a city line, and then the road starting from the other side a year later on the other city to meet that same road. So ideally, you know, the dream that Tom and I and the league and I have is that they take this, they say, okay, let's list the projects out. Oh gosh, that we have this road in common. Let's bid it together. Let's work together and bid that project together, get our costs down, have some efficiencies, and make it easier for the community and the transportation as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's exactly what I wanted her to show is
Awesome. Thanks, Tom.
and it's an easy tool to use. We've been messing around with it a little bit too in the office. And so again, the more information that the cities and towns provide, the more detail they provide, the more.
I know what he's saying. Basically, the more detail they provide us, the more information we have in here, the better coordination and the more.
Companies.
You were cutting out again. Tom.
I know, Tom. I've had those days too. I think we've all had those days. Okay, we have another question. Again, Jonna Bricky at DFDG. Thank you, Jonna, for your engagement here. We'd love to know people are curious. Is there a way to translate this data to the educational entities such as K-12 districts and community college districts to entice trade educational opportunities? How can we make working on these projects sexy to our student population in an effort to address our manpower shortage?
Ooh, super good questions.
Good question.
Yeah. So on the manpower, I'm going to let maybe Tom answer how we could work with the cities and the high schools. But so community colleges is an easy answer. They have districts. I just saw 3 of them pop up this last week. They'll be entered. So like Eastern Arizona, Maricopa Community, Pinal or Pima Community, those will all be directly in Capital Pipeline. K-12 is a bit tricky. I obviously our early clients have asked us to go into K-12. The problem with K-12 is the budgets that they produce change almost immediately after production. And there isn't the transparency requirements that there are on our cities, towns, counties, states. So I don't have the same guarantee of accuracy that I do with the other entities. So I have not gone down the K-12 road. That doesn't mean we won't ever go down the K-12 road. We certainly have had a ton of interest and a ton of requests about it. So Jonna, if you want a side project, girl, I got you.
Yeah, let me just, you know what, now my internet is still functioning. I would just say quickly that the Arizona Sports Association would be a good partnership. They have a similar organization to ours, and they might be able to work similarly with you as the league did, and get that set up, because they deal with the same groups, and they might be able to convince their school boards to start using the same kind of builder so that the information is better for you to use.
What a great point, Tom. That's fantastic. Okay, we've got about 5 more minutes here. Anybody else with some last burning questions that you'd like to see answered?
Well, while we're waiting for the questions, I did put in the chat, and I'll be sending out an email after this presentation to go to our website, request a guest pass, and you'll have access to the dashboard that you've seen here for 24 hours, and there'll be a little more information. And if you have any follow-up questions, or you'd like Capital Pipeline to present at your association or with your city and kind of help you work through this information and learn how to use the tool. That is literally why Joe exists in our company, is to work with you and to come and present and help you use this tool. He's super excited to engage with the cities, associations, counties, and the state agencies. So.
Right. And I believe, Stephanie, you had discussed that there might be some follow-up programs and some deeper dives on these market sectors themselves. Is that correct?
Yes. So we'll also be sending out an announcement after this, and when we have basically once a week for the next 4 weeks, we're going to dive deeper on a topic. It'll be a free LinkedIn event, and we're going to have different partners, different industry partners. One of our attendees, Anthony Jeffers, is going to come on and hopefully talk to us about federal work. And we have other guests lined up. So look for that announcement, and hopefully we'll be able to get even deeper in the questions and have a little bit more industry experts and some people on the city side and state.
Fantastic. All right. Any last questions before we close out the day today? No. All right. Well, Joe, I'm going to hand this back over to you to close us out today.
Thank you, Deirdre, and thank you all, our panelists, our co-sponsors, Tom and the league. You can see why Stephanie and I are just so excited about this. We're giving a tool to Senator Mark Kelly's office and to Luis to identify projects for potential federal funding, to be able to go to those communities and say, hey, we think we found a way for you to find some money for this project. And they'll be shocked that the senator even knew the project was being planned. We're giving cities an opportunity, as Tom has pointed out, for collaboration, for research. Are we investing enough in recreation as a like-sized community in Arizona? And do we need to revisit that? And then, of course, we're giving a tool to the AEC sector to identify opportunities maybe 5 years before, the RFP is even issued. An opportunity to, as Stephanie said, to address the issues of labor and commodities, years in advance. An opportunity to line up those subcontractors, and then an opportunity for those subcontractors to get a piece of this pie, as our state continues to grow. So we were delighted that all of you took time out of your schedule to join us today. As Stephanie said, there'll be opportunities that we'd like to take advantage of that you would offer to us to come out, present, because we really want to spread the word about Capital Pipeline. Again, a cutting edge research tool that Stephanie has been the genius behind, that exists nowhere else in the country. And we really do want to make this available as widely as possible. So thank you again, one and all.
I'd like to real quick thank you to our sponsors and to early supporters like Goodman Schwartz and Tank Girl and the League, that it was not a one-woman show, it was a team effort. And I wanted just to thank them again for all their support over the last year.
All right. Well, with that, thank you, everyone. And hopefully we'll see you back here next week for some updates.
Thank you.